There is a type of power that does not beg for permission. It does not negotiate. It does not wait. It takes. And those who wield it, those who carve their names into history with blood and fire, are not like the rest of us. They do not hesitate. They do not doubt. They do not flinch. We remember them by many names: tyrants, dictators, conquerors, monsters. But history is not so simple. Some built empires, others committed atrocities. Some were celebrated in their time, only to be reviled later. But all of them, without exception, were ruthless. What makes a leader ruthless? Is it pure ambition, unchecked by morality? Is it an obsession with control? Or is it something deeper, a fundamental truth about power itself? In this video, we will go beyond the headlines and textbooks. We will strip away the propaganda and the myths. We will examine the minds of history's most ruthless leaders, their psychology, their tactics, their downfall. But most importantly, we will uncover the lessons hidden beneath the horror. Because whether we like it or not, ruthlessness shapes the world, and those who understand it have an advantage over those who don't. Let's begin. Power is the oldest force in human history. Before laws, before religion, before civilization itself, there was power. The strong took from the weak. Cunning outmaneuvered the trusting. Survival belonged to those willing to do what others wouldn't. But as societies grew, brute force was no longer enough. Power had to be justified. Kings ruled by divine right. Emperors claimed they were gods. Dictators called themselves the voice of the people. Yet beneath every golden throne, beneath every patriotic speech, the truth remained the same. Power belongs to those who seize it, and those who refuse to let go will do anything to keep it. This is where history's most ruthless leaders emerge. Their names stretch across time. Genghis Khan, who turned the Mongol hordes into an unstoppable war machine. Ivan the Terrible, whose paranoia led him to slaughter his own people. Adolf Hitler, whose ideology plunged the world into chaos. Joseph Stalin, who starved millions to cement his rule. Different eras, different justifications, same pattern. These leaders did not rise to power through kindness. They did not rule through compassion. They understood a simple, brutal truth. Fear is more reliable than love. Machiavelli knew this. In The Prince, he wrote that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, because love is fragile, but fear is absolute. A ruler who is feared does not need the people's loyalty. He does not need their affection. He only needs their obedience. Lord Acton warned us, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The more a ruler grips control, the less they see reality. Surrounded by yes-men, insulated from the suffering they cause, they lose all sense of humanity. Result? Paranoia, brutality, purges. Hobbes saw it coming. In Leviathan, he argued that people will accept tyranny if the alternative is worse. If the choice is between an iron-fisted ruler and chaos, they will choose the iron fist. This is why ruthless leaders always manufacture threats, real or imagined. A nation at war does not question its leader. A population in fear does not rebel. And so, history repeats. Ruthless leaders rise. They build their myths. They tighten their grip. They eliminate their enemies, until, inevitably, they fall. Because power, once taken, is never secure. The same brutality that keeps them in control also breeds resentment. The same fear that silences opposition also fuels resistance. And when the time comes, no amount of terror can save them. But that moment, the moment before the fall, is when they are at their most dangerous. Because a ruler who knows his time is running out will stop at nothing to hold on. The question is, what drives these leaders? Is it greed? Madness? Or is it something deeper? Something wired into the human mind itself? Let's find out. Ruthless leaders are not ordinary people. Their minds work differently. Their decisions are colder. Their ambitions, limitless. They see the world not as it is, but as something to be conquered, controlled, and bent to their will. Why? Psychologists have an answer. The Dark Triad. This theory, introduced by Paulhus and Williams in 2002, identifies 3 personality traits that define ruthlessness: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Narcissism, a grand sense of self-importance. The belief that they are destined for greatness. Criticism is intolerable. Their image must be flawless. Machiavellianism, masterful manipulation. Every relationship is a tool, every promise expendable. The ends always justify the means. Psychopathy, a lack of empathy, no guilt, no remorse, just calculation. If eliminating 1,000,000 people strengthens their rule, they won't hesitate. History's most ruthless rulers fit this mold perfectly. Genghis Khan had an almost supernatural confidence in his destiny. He called himself the scourge of God. Stalin played his rivals like a chess game, turning allies into enemies and enemies into corpses. Hitler had no emotional connection to the suffering he caused, only the vision of his empire. But this raises a disturbing question. Were these men born ruthless, or did power corrupt them? The answer is both. Many ruthless leaders showed signs of cruelty early in life. Stalin as a street thug, Nero killing small animals for fun, Mao Zedong writing about his joy in watching people suffer. But power amplifies ruthlessness. Once a leader discovers that fear works, that betrayal is useful, that brutality brings results, it becomes a pattern, and patterns become unstoppable. This is why leaders grow more brutal over time. Their first crimes feel risky, their second, easier. By the 10th, it's habit. Soon, they trust no one. Their enemies multiply, their paranoia grows. And when a leader reaches this stage, when they fear losing power more than anything else, they do the unthinkable. They turn on their own people. The Great Purges, the Reign of Terror, the killing fields, these were not acts of war. They were acts of self-preservation. A dictator always believes someone is plotting against them. If they can't find a traitor, they will create one. Stalin wiped out his own generals. Robespierre executed his fellow revolutionaries. Pol Pot turned his country into a mass grave. Why? Because of one simple truth. The longer you hold power, the more enemies you make. The more enemies you make, the more paranoid you become. And paranoia always leads to blood. But how do they keep control when their hands are soaked in blood? How do they prevent the masses from rising up? They use the most effective weapon in history, fear. And that's what we'll uncover next. Fear is the ultimate tool of control. It is more powerful than money, more lasting than propaganda, and more predictable than loyalty. Fear does not require belief, it only requires survival. Ruthless leaders understand this better than anyone. They do not ask for love. They do not need devotion. They only need people to be afraid of what happens if they disobey. The theory of fear-based compliance. Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan argued that people will accept even the worst tyranny if the alternative is chaos. Fear makes them compliant. This is why ruthless leaders always position themselves as the lesser evil. They create a choice, me or destruction, submit or suffer. Hitler claimed that without him, Germany would collapse into ruin. Stalin convinced his people that enemies lurked everywhere, so they needed him to survive. Kim Jong-il created a system where even thinking about rebellion meant death for 3 generations of a family. Fear is not just about punishment, it's about uncertainty. When people know the rules, they can navigate them. But when rules change overnight, when yesterday's ally is today's enemy, people become paralyzed. They stop thinking, they stop resisting. This is how dictators keep their grip. They purge their own ranks constantly. They eliminate their most loyal supporters just to remind the others that no one is safe. Stalin's inner circle lived in terror, knowing that one wrong word, one misunderstood glance could mean execution. But fear alone is not enough. People need a reason for their suffering, a justification, a target, the scapegoat strategy. Every ruthless leader needs an enemy, someone to blame, a group to point at and say, they are the reason for your misery. They are the ones holding us back. They are the traitors. Hitler blamed Jews, communists, and undesirables for Germany's struggles. Mao blamed intellectuals and landlords, sparking mass persecutions. Stalin labeled his own officials counter-revolutionaries before having them executed. This is scapegoat theory in action. Psychologists say that when people feel powerless, they look for someone to blame. Ruthless leaders exploit this, keeping the masses focused on an enemy rather than the real source of their suffering, the leader himself. And yet, even the most ruthless rulers know fear alone is not enough. It must be paired with something stronger, something intoxicating. The cult of personality. Dictators do not just rule by force, they rule by myth. They become gods in the eyes of their people. Their portraits hang in homes, their speeches are memorized, their words become sacred truth. This is the great man theory in action. The idea that history is shaped not by ordinary people but by extraordinary individuals. Ruthless leaders rewrite their own legacies, portraying themselves as saviors rather than tyrants. North Korea calls Kim Jong-un a genius who can drive at age 3. China taught children that Mao swam across a river faster than an Olympic athlete. Stalin's propaganda painted him as a kind, fatherly figure, even as he sent millions to their deaths. When a leader achieves this level of worship, reality no longer matters. Their followers will defend them, justify their crimes, even die for them. And yet, history tells us something else, something deeper. Ruthless regimes, no matter how powerful, do not last. Every dictator, every tyrant, every unchallenged ruler has one thing in common. They fall, and that's what we'll explore next. History repeats. The names change, the methods evolve, but the principles remain the same. Ruthless leaders rise, consolidate power, create fear, and eventually collapse. But if we understand their tactics, we can recognize them before it's too late. Here's what we must learn. Unchecked power is always dangerous. It does not matter how noble a leader's intentions seem. If there are no limits to their power, corruption follows. The most brutal rulers in history did not begin as monsters. They became monsters because no one could stop them. Lesson: question authority. Support checks and balances. Never trust a leader who demands total obedience. Fear is the most effective weapon. Recognize it. When a leader tells you to be afraid, ask yourself, who benefits from my fear? Fear is used to justify surveillance, crackdowns, censorship, and war. Once people accept oppression in the name of security, they rarely get their freedom back. Lesson: be skeptical of leaders who always warn of unseen enemies. Fear-mongering is a tool. Learn to recognize when it's being used against you. A society ruled by fear is a society already under control. Worshipping a leader is always a red flag. And when people begin treating a leader like a savior, history tells us it never ends well. Personality cults are not about leadership. They are about control. The moment someone is placed above criticism, they become dangerous. Lesson: no one is beyond question. Be wary of leaders who claim they alone can fix everything. Propaganda is powerful. Be aware when you're being manipulated. Divide and conquer keeps tyrants in power. A divided population is easier to rule. Ruthless leaders stoke division, pit groups against each other, and distract people from real issues. If a country is constantly fighting within itself, the leader stays in power. Lesson: pay attention to how leaders talk about different groups. If a leader always blames others, they are hiding something. Real power lies in unity, not division. War is the ultimate justification for tyranny. Ruthless leaders love war. War allows them to silence opposition, expand control, and demand obedience. Whether real or manufactured, war keeps them in power. If a leader is always pushing for conflict, there's a reason. Lesson: be suspicious when war is framed as the only option. Understand that war often benefits the powerful, not the people. Look for who profits, because someone always does. Ruthless leaders always fall, but at a cost. History shows that ruthless regimes are not sustainable. They collapse under their own paranoia, their brutality, their instability. But the fall of a tyrant is rarely peaceful. The suffering they cause lingers long after they're gone. Lesson: preventing tyranny is easier than overthrowing it. Learn from history so it doesn't repeat. Recognize the signs before it's too late. Ruthless leadership is not just a thing of the past. It exists today in governments, corporations, and social movements. The tactics are the same. The consequences are the same. The only difference is whether we see them coming. History is not just a collection of old stories. It is a warning. Pay attention. Because the moment people stop questioning power is the moment it wins. Ruthless leaders do not rise alone. They are created by fear, by desperation, by the willingness of people to trade freedom for security. And once they take power, they never stop. They push the limits further, test how much they can get away with, and silence anyone who dares to resist. But history is clear. No ruthless ruler reigns forever. The same fear they use to control others eventually consumes them. The same brutality that crushes their enemies breeds more enemies. The same paranoia that keeps them in power isolates them from reality. Their fall is inevitable. But the question is, at what cost? Some are overthrown in bloody revolutions. Others are assassinated by their own inner circle. Some die as their empires crumble around them, leaving behind nothing but suffering. But the real tragedy is not their downfall, it's the damage they leave behind. The scars on nations, the lives lost, the generations trapped in the consequences of their rule. This is why understanding ruthlessness is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a survival skill. Never trust absolute power. If no one can challenge a leader, they will eventually abuse their position. Fear is a trap. It is the easiest way to control people, but only if they let it. Beware of leaders who demand loyalty but give none in return. They see followers as tools, not as people. Pay attention to history. The patterns of tyranny do not change. Only the faces do. The world will always have leaders who seek control at any cost. The only question is whether we see them for what they are before it's too late. So remember this. A ruthless ruler's greatest weapon is not an army. It is a population that refuses to question. Are we watching closely enough?